Hello, I'm Tony Inhorn.
And I'm Martin.
And we're both presidents of the Peacejam Club. So our club is dedicated to spreading peace in our community. Our main program is a bullying prevention program at the middle school, where we do interactive activities with the kids regarding bullying and reducing it. Our speaker that we have brought in today fits very well with the ideals of our club.
Nicole Maganelli is the director of the Maine Youth Action Network, an organization that values meaningful youth involvement in our society, just like Peacejam. She has been doing anti-oppression work across Maine for 13 years, and we are thrilled to have her here with us today.
Hi, I'm Mary Hayes. So while education is one of the major points in school, socialization is also important. And if this socialization is tainted with bias and harassment, which is something that's not the fault of the student, then the school becomes an unwelcoming and unsafe place. But it doesn't have to be this way, because the goal of Peacejam is to eliminate this by working to prevent bullying.
School is a place where people come to learn. Regardless of your race, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, or your faith, everyone should be treated equally and fair. Look around you. Every student here is different, and this should be embraced and celebrated, rather than used as a mechanism to bully and harass and ostracize people. Everyone in this room today is here because they want to learn. It is important that this school offers a level playing ground for all students to achieve great things, regardless if they are different. So now let's give a warm welcome to our speaker today, Nicole Maganelli.
So here I am, and you are not going to listen to what I have to say. You aren't going to listen because you don't know me, because we don't have a relationship, and because this is not how change happens. I'm not here to tell you to start doing some things or stop doing other things, because you won't listen to me. The research about bias and harassment says that the reason young people harass other people, the reason they call people names or make assumptions or stereotype people because of their race or their ethnicity or their religion or how much money their family has or their weight or disabilities or sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, any of these reasons, that people say things because of those reasons for one major goal, for peer approval. So that other people think that they're funny or other people think that they're cool. People say stuff like, people say gay like it's an insult. Or people call people names because of how much money they have or their body size or their disabilities. Or because of rumors that get spread about them or things that they did. I'm curious, how many of you hear any kind of language like this in your school at all? Like whether people are joking or not, just by a show of hands. I'd like you to keep your hands up for a second. How many people hear stuff like this once a month? Raise your hand. More often or less often? More often? How about like once a week? Keep your hands up if you hear it once a week. More? Like once a day? Multiple times a day? Okay, you can put your hands down. So I gotta tell you, I have not yet been in a school, and I've done this in dozens and dozens of schools at this point. I have not ever been in a school where that question gets answered differently. People say stuff like, people say gay like it's an insult. Or people call people names because of how much money they have or their body size or their disabilities. Or because of rumors that get spread about them or things that they did. I'm curious, how many of you hear any kind of language like this in your school at all? Like whether people are joking or not, just by a show of hands. I'd like you to keep your hands up for a second. How many people hear stuff like this once a month? Raise your hand. More often or less often? More often? How about like once a week? Keep your hands up if you hear it once a week. More? Like once a day? Multiple times a day? Okay, you can put your hands down. So I gotta tell you, I have not yet been in a school, and I've done this in dozens and dozens of schools at this point. I have not ever been in a school where that question gets answered differently. It always comes back to like, yeah, this is stuff that we hear people toss around, usually multiple times a day. And a lot of people are like, people say like they're just joking, or like it's just part of how people talk to each other. But when I hear this stuff, I think of some of the ongoing history of violence attached to so many of those words. I think about the fact that some people have had their lives changed, pretty drastically altered, and taken in some cases, while people were causing them harm and saying those kind of things at the same time. And people tell me like, Nicole, we don't mean it like that. It doesn't mean that anymore. Like, it's just how people talk to each other. But my question, I guess, is how can it not mean that anymore when the most recent statistics about, say, the number of women who will experience violence in their lifetime is 1 in 3. 35%. That's actually a huge number. And how can it not mean that anymore when people of color still are more likely to experience discrimination in healthcare and have worse health outcomes than white people in the US in 2018? And how can it not mean that anymore when there are still LGBTQ kids who go to school and feel afraid every day? So, regardless of people's intention behind the words that they use, there's still an impact that people don't totally have control over. How many of you have seen somebody who's been negatively impacted by bias or harassment or stereotypes of some kind in school? Can you raise your hands? And how many of you have seen somebody who has been really anxious or really depressed because of stereotypes or bias or that kind of stuff at school? Raise your hand. How many of you know people who maybe haven't wanted to come to school because of any of this stuff happening? Yeah. I've asked this question a lot of places, and regardless, the answers are the same. And you know what we need you for? We need you to reach out to people. There was this big survey done of a whole bunch of middle and high school students in Maine. And they asked students who had been targeted in some way with bias or harassment in school what they most wanted to see happen as a result of that stuff. Like, what did they most want people to do for them? And I expected the answer to that to be that they wanted people to stand up for them. That they wanted people to like march into the middle of a situation and be like, hey, cut it out, leave that person alone. Like, and actually the most common answer was, I want somebody to reach out to me. Even more than I want somebody to stand up in that moment. I want somebody to be like, hey, I don't actually think that too. Or like, hey, all right then. So the question is, I was talking about how like some people build up armor, and then was also saying like, hey, reach out to people. And the question is like, how do you get through that armor that somebody's built if they have been experiencing this stuff a fair amount? And I think the short answer and the real answer is that you can't always. I think that there are sometimes, I think we have to let go of the outcome a little bit sometimes and be willing to be like, hey, I'm sorry that happened to you, and not expect much in return, right? Because that person might not be able to turn to you and be like, hey, it actually meant a lot to me that you just said that. It actually meant a lot to me that you noticed or cared about what just happened in the hall. So I think letting go a little bit of what that person's response is and just knowing that it could actually be making a pretty big impact on them for you to check in on them. That's sort of my real answer to that. So I don't always think you can, but it's still worth it to try. For sure. I worked at a school in central Maine at a high school for about 10 years. And when we started there, they were having pretty intense, pretty bloody fights in the hallways. There was a lot of racially motivated bias. There was a lot of conflict and a lot of tension between the students at the school. And by the time we started working in that school, started doing these student leader project workshops, so bringing students together to have conversations about what was going on at school and what to do about it. We also worked with the faculty over a number of years about how they respond when they see and hear this stuff happening. And over time, the last few years that we worked there, I don't think that they had a physical fight in the last few years that we worked there. And there were a lot more students who had friendships across identities. There were a lot more students who were friends with people who were different than them. And a lot more relationships had been built. There was a lot less use of slurs and stuff in the hallways, and in locker rooms and all those other places. So yeah, it definitely can happen.